Hello, my name is Maurice McCartney, and I'd like to welcome you to this Imagine Festival event, Creating a Fairer Society, in conversation with the Alternative Economists. For decades, we were told that there is no alternative to the dominant economic model that said the best thing for government to do is to get out of the way of the markets and let the markets, by which they meant profit maximizing companies, decide how best to distribute resources and rewards. Well, if there's one thing that's become clear in the baker's dozen years or so since the great crash, through the long decade of austerity and demagoguery, and now through a global pandemic, it's that the old economic model lies in pieces and that it's time for a new alternative. So I'm delighted to say I'm joined by 4 alternative economists this evening, not economists of the ivory tower or of Wall Street, but practical economists who are building a new economy in our high streets, in our communities, in our neighborhoods. Before we meet them, don't forget you can submit questions through the chat function, and we'll try to respond to as many of them as we can this evening. If we can't get through them all, we will be doing a couple of podcasts afterwards to follow up. So keep an eye on our social media feeds and websites. I'll give you some more details about those later. Or follow the hashtag #AlternativeEconomists. And yeah, as I say, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can, but we'll do a podcast to follow up. So without further delay, let's meet the alternative economists. And perhaps Tiziana, I'll turn to you first. If you could maybe in a couple of words tell us who you are and what you do.
Yes, thank you very much, Maurice. Good evening to everyone. My name is Tiziana O'Hara, and I work for an organization called the Cooperative Alternatives, a cooperative development body that's based in Belfast that helps groups interested in setting up and grow cooperatives. That's my job.
Very good. And Bridget, do you want to tell us who you are and your work?
Yeah, hi everybody, thanks for joining us. My name is Bridget Meehan. I'm co-founder of the Northern Mutual Bank campaign, which is, as the name says, a campaign to establish a mutual bank in the north of Ireland.
Very good. Lee, do you want to follow on next?
Yeah, thanks very much. I'm really delighted to be here. My name's Lee Robb. I'm co-founder of Repair Cafe Belfast, and in ordinary circumstances, we'd be running pop-up community repair events all over the town. And I'm also founder of Positive Carrickfergus. And one aspect of work we're trying to do in Carrickfergus is a community-led regeneration project.
Thank you very much. And Mary, last but not least.
My name is Mary McManus, and I'm a community wealth building advocate, promoting community wealth building where I can. And so thanks, Maura.
Leads us,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that leads us pretty directly to the main topic of this evening's discussion, which is to say community wealth building. And of course, you've recently written on that, you've been researching it. So maybe you could just tell us some of the key points of the idea.
Okay, thanks, Maurice. For the past 20 odd years, I've worked in the advice sector, and as Maurice has said, you know, the last years of austerity, 13 or so years, have been, for me, has been an experience of witnessing poverty increasing year on year in Belfast. So this led me to an interest in economics, which led me, as Maurice said, to do some research on community wealth building last year. Now, poverty is not new, and it has not come with the pandemic. The pandemic has just laid all the inequalities bare for us to see. But one thing that I think many people are becoming more aware of, as Maura said, is there is an alternative. The current system that we have is not preordained, and as such, we can create a different system, one that creates equality and that allows us to live within planetary boundaries. In 2018, I first heard about Preston City Council and how they were practicing a different form of local economic development called community wealth building. This approach led them to being named the most improved city in the UK and moving out of the top 20% most deprived cities. As far as I could see, it was a common sense approach to economic development that was centered on ensuring that the wealth that was already in a place was kept circulating rather than leaking away. And it's also a more democratic approach that aims to put more ownership, more control, and more of the benefits in the hands of local people. Preston has inspired many other places to adopt community wealth building, including Islington and Newham in London, North Ayrshire in Scotland and Wirral, and various other places. The Scottish and Welsh governments are exploring the approach, and our own Minister for Communities has committed to embedding community wealth building into her development and spend priorities. So how does it work in practice? Well, what's really key to understanding community wealth building is the concept of anchor institutions. Now, anchor institutions are public institutions such as councils, universities, and health trusts. They are called anchors because they are not likely to up sticks and move elsewhere. And they have a significant amount of assets and spending power. So community wealth building is based around 5 principles. So the first principle is fair employment and just labour markets. So if we think about the anchor institutions, by paying the real living wage, having progression routes and targeting recruitment at lower income areas, these institutions can really improve the prospects of local people and local economies. For example, Preston became a real living wage employer. Liverpool City Council realised that outsourcing didn't deliver value for money. On the contrary, it delivered redundancies and a reduction in workers' rights and poor quality services. So they took refuge collection and street cleaning back in-house. They made savings, created jobs, and gave people stability. The second principle of community wealth building is progressive procurement of goods and services. So this is about the local anchor institutions collaborating to ensure that they procure services and goods, to ensure how they procure services and goods supports the local economy. So if you think about the very large budgets that some of those institutions have and how they procure their services. So in Preston, 6 anchors got together and analysed where their procurement spend was going. They discovered that most of the money was going outside of Preston and Lancashire. So they broke down their contracts to ensure that local small medium enterprises and cooperatives were in a position to bid for contracts. They also introduced social clauses into their tenders, and they had meet the buyer events to support local businesses to tender for contracts. This brought 274 million back into the Preston and Lancashire community, which helped to develop a dense local supply of businesses that supported local employment and retained wealth locally. And what is really interesting, that during the pandemic, it's evident that it has also helped to create a more resilient economy, as Preston has a furlough rate of 6.9% compared with the UK average of 12.5%. So you can imagine that small businesses that are dependent on the spend of anchor institutions who have not been impacted by the pandemic in the way that large private organisations are going to survive better. So the third pillar is plural ownership of the economy. Preston Council have not only been supporting local small medium enterprises, they've also been creating more democratically owned businesses by developing cooperatives to meet gaps in demand in the local area. They are investing in a cinema and restaurant complex, which will be owned by the council, not privately owned, ensuring good working conditions and that local people benefit from the profits. Small medium enterprises, cooperatives, and municipally owned businesses all help lock wealth into a place and stop it leaking away, which is financially generative for the local economy. With large private organisations, wealth in the form of profits can leave a place to go to distant shareholders. And Tiziana is going to talk about the cooperative sector in Northern Ireland later on. So the fourth pillar is the socially just use of land and property. Anchor institutions own a significant amount of land and assets. In Belfast, for example, 40% of the land is owned by anchor institutions, with Belfast City Council and the Harbour Commission owning 34% between them. In the community wealth building model, these assets are treated as part of our commonwealth, and their functioning and ownership provides a social and financial benefit for citizens. This can involve placing the assets, such as a building, in community control through a social asset transfer, for example, or Birmingham, for example, in Birmingham University Hospitals, the Birmingham University Hospital allow community groups to use their facilities for conferences for free and give over space for a farmer's market. Our anchors could make some of their buildings available to social and environmental projects, such as the Repair Cafe movement that Lee will talk about. So the final pillar of community wealth building is making financial power work for local places. This is about increasing flows of investment within local economies by harnessing and recirculating the wealth that already exists, as opposed to attracting capital. So for example, instead of savings being placed in a private bank where shareholders benefit, they could be placed in a mutually owned bank that would support local businesses. There are plans underway in many regions of the UK to develop a mutual bank. Bridget will talk more about the campaign underway to have such a bank here. How are public sector pension funds invested? Could they be invested in a way that supports the local community? In Preston, they have invested 100 million of local authority pension funds in student houses to benefit their community rather than a project further afield. So for years doing my job in the advice sector, I talked about the problem of poverty that I was seeing through my work. But community wealth building has made me realize that poverty isn't the problem. The problem is the huge amounts of wealth that we have and the fact that our economic system does not ensure that everyone benefits from it. Between them, Queen's University Belfast and the Belfast Health and Social Care Trust have a spend of over 2 billion. While our institutions have historically been slow to adopt community wealth building here, fortunately, local citizens, such as my fellow alternative economists here tonight, have already done some of the groundwork. Community wealth building offers us a way to build back fairer and greener after COVID.
That's marvelous. Thank you very much, Mary. And Tiziana, Mary was talking a little bit about some of the pillars, and one of the central pillars, of course, is the cooperative movement. Maybe you could tell us a little bit in general about the cooperative movement and about the cooperative movement in Northern Ireland in particular.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mary, for introducing the cooperative movement to the audience. Of course, as a cooperative developer and a promoter of the cooperative sector, I really welcome this new policy framework that Mary has already described. And I wanted to connect this policy framework to what is the sector now and why it's important to the sector. So cooperatives, what are they? Are members own and democratically controlled enterprises. So practically these cooperative, these entities abide by internationally recognized principles and definitions. That means that a cooperative in Northern Ireland has the same definition, the same principle than a cooperative in Italy, where I come from. And also that the cooperatives are enterprises, so they are businesses, but they are value-driven, not profit-driven, although they needed to be profitable to survive, to be self-sustaining. And in Northern Ireland in particular, we have recently updated our database, and I can tell you that we have around 214 cooperatives. About 140 are credit unions, and the remaining 69 are a variety of type of cooperatives: agricultural cooperatives, retail co-ops, you know, your corner shops and the co-op shops down the street, but also new emerging cooperatives, trading energy, food, artisan beer, and managing local assets, or build new assets like housing cooperatives, that they are an emerging kind of model in Northern Ireland. So really cooperatives in the last almost 10 years have addressed the foundational needs of the economy, you know, food, energy, all things that they are important to our living, and they make a difference to our living. So there are a total of 766,000 members. They employ over 3,000 people. And as I said, as a development body on the ground, we saw a surge of interest in cooperative models. And this is why we welcome this shift of policy, public policy, what Mary has described as the community wealth building policy, that we believe will enhance the capacity of the cooperative sector and will create more cooperatives, hopefully, in our economy. So far, the cooperative sector have been reliant on values like self-help. self-reliance. We have done things by ourselves, practically. Very little help came from the state, and certainly the private sector didn't really comply with our own values. So in some sort of way, we are welcoming a new kind of outlook of what the public sector can do in order to enabling a ground for cooperative development. In particular, when Mary was talking about what are the pillars of this public policy, I'm really interested to see the application of diversify the local economic landscape. What does it mean? Unfortunately, the economic landscape so far has been dominated by very few models, the private enterprise models, where exactly the shareholders that hold maybe the majority of the wealth in their own hands also reap the majority of the profit. So in that kind of aspect, we really needed to diversify our local economic landscape. And in a way that, like a cooperative do, that the distribution of wealth, because we are built in that way, is done equitably and fairly. And then we can say that we are built in that way because in our constitution, in our legal structure, we have embedded the principle of one member, one vote, not one share, one vote. So the democracy of what we decide, the democracy of how we distribute wealth is within the nature and the structure of our own entities. I'm also very interested in what Mary said about the plurality of ownership models. So we have the public ownership model, we have the private ownership model, but we have also the cooperative ownership model, where the workers, for instance, or the community is co-owning assets, wealth, and anything that belongs to the cooperative. And that kind of workers and community ownership, we are at the point in our history now that I think we needed to rediscover and we needed to appreciate more. Because it's that type of ownership that will redistribute and creates wealth in our communities. You know, all that kind of understanding around the seeping away of the profits if, you know, the shareholders belong to somewhere else. When you are actually working with the local cooperatives, that's a great need of the cooperative to keep jobs and wealth local in their communities. So cooperatives, also I wanted to say, and this is my final point, maybe then we can discuss more, the cooperatives do really offer solutions. We have seen in the last 10 years, we were on the ground as a development body and help groups, and do really offer practical solutions to practical problems, real problems. So when we were working with NICE, the Northern Ireland Community Energy, the practical problem was that there was no kind of renewable energy done through solar panels in Northern Ireland. And they wanted to address that particular issue in Northern Ireland. And they did it in a cooperative way, created a cooperative of interest of environmentalist people that would have supported the initiative, as well as a group of community centers and social enterprises that would be very willing to put the solar panels on their roof, for instance. So the cooperative solution was answering some kind of needs, and in that sense was solved in a democratic way because all the participants were democratically co-owning the enterprise. So in the past few years, we saw workers' cooperatives flourish, as well as energy cooperatives set up, alternative community farming in a cooperative owned in a cooperative way, new consumers cooperatives, paying attention to healthy food, and all this, to me, still represent the practical solution we are looking for now to real problems, and they can actually address the economic imbalance that we have. I can stop here now and maybe let somebody else talk.
Yes, thank you very much. The cooperative movement, obviously central part of the community wealth building model, and that's about, you know, making and selling produce, but it's also about money. Bridget, maybe you could tell us a little bit about a kind of almost like a cooperative approach to banking, mutual banking.
Yeah, thanks, Maurice. As I said at the start, I'm part of the Northern Mutual Bank campaign. So the idea is to set up a mutual bank here, and that is about, you know, that would be a cooperative. And actually the campaign is being assisted by Tiziana and her role in Cooperative Alternatives, because it is, you know, it's developing a co-op, which is part of what she does. So I'll just very briefly talk about what mutual banking is, just to explain that and how it's different from banking as we know it now, and how it can help us with community wealth building and address that finance pillar within community wealth building. So mutual banking basically is an alternative approach to banking. What we have now, it moves away from the privatized system that we've got today and towards a more democratized system that gives each of us a say in how our money can be used for our benefit and the benefit of our region. And it has a number of unique features. And I'll quickly go through those. It's mutual, it says it in the name, but that basically means that it's a consumer co-op that's owned by its members and accountable to its members. And it's not owned by shareholders, which our high street banks are. And that means that shareholders, they have certain demands and they have certain needs, and it's usually around profit. And that conflicts with what a customer might want for a bank. So a conventional bank has to answer to its shareholders and make sure that they generate profit for them, and the customer comes second to that. But in a mutual, the customers are members, they own the bank, and they therefore, and their needs and what's important to them comes first. And this is a really crucial difference between a mutual banking approach and the current banking approach. So it's similar in some ways to what the kind of values or principles that credit unions have, but at the same time, it offers the whole range of services that you'd expect from a bank. So the current accounts, business accounts, overdrafts, debit cards, secured and unsecured loans, mortgages, the whole gamut. Another unique feature about mutual banking is that it's regional. So it serves a specific region only. In this case, it would be us here in the north, and members of the bank have to live in or be connected with the region in some way. So there's no kind of investment going on outside of the region or money being kind of siphoned off outside the region. Everything gets recycled back in, which is really one of those kind of principles of community wealth building, that the money gets recycled back in to the region. And, you know, something that I find is that we believe here that we don't have any money, that we don't have any wealth, but that's not the case. There is wealth there, but it's not really that we lack wealth, it's how it's distributed at the minute, and it's not really been fairly distributed, and we're not getting the right kind of access to it. Most of the savings that we put into credit unions, for example, end up, if they're not loaned out to members, that will end up in private bank accounts or bank accounts in privately owned banks. And that then gets invested outside our region. It's not even being used for our benefit. So that mutual banking can stop that from happening. Mutual banks are also ethical, so they're not profit driven, they're purpose driven, value driven, like Tiziana said about cooperatives. They don't believe in giving excessive salaries or bonuses to executives, which has happened, as we see in the current banking system. And even since the crash in 2008, they've continued to get the big salaries and the big bonuses. But the mutual doesn't do that. It also prioritizes what's best for people in the region, what's best for the environment here. And it's a mutual bank will serve the financial needs of those who aren't so well served by the high street banks today. For example, micro businesses, small businesses, co-ops, social enterprises, farmers, those kind of people will be better served by a mutual bank, because a mutual bank has the region's best interests at heart. Another feature, and this is the last one I want to draw attention to, is that it's inclusive. It promotes financial inclusion. So no one can be refused a bank account regardless of their income or their credit history, which can happen now. A lot of people don't have access to banking services because their incomes are so low or their credit histories are so poor. The bank doesn't even, typical high street bank might not even want their business because it's not worth a lot to them. And of course, them being profit driven, they're looking for the most profitable customers. Community groups, new community groups trying to start up, and charities, they often struggle to get a bank account open. But the mutual will welcome those and take away some of the pain of trying to get a bank account open for those. And one of the things that we plan to do in the campaign is to make sure that we have a mix of physical and digital channels. So yes, we'll have internet banking, mobile banking possible for people, those services, as you would expect with any kind of modern banking service, but we'll also have bring back the physical network, which is disappearing quite rapidly. And although physical branches do cost money, the high street banks are cutting back on those because that cuts costs and that allows them to generate more profits for their shareholders. And the mutual doesn't have that as a focus. The mutual is about trying to serve the needs of the members. So it will be important to actually have branches across the whole region. And we have software and IT that allows us to have not just staffed branches, but automated branches as well. And we can cut costs there and maybe start sharing different premises with groups or other organizations that would allow us to house branches in existing kind of organization premises. So those are kind of the unique features. And, how do we get a bank like that here? How can we have that? Well, the campaign to have one of those banks has already been launched here. We're actually registered with the Financial Conduct Authority as the Northern Mutual, so that will be the name when it opens. And we have a board set up and an advisory committee. So we've already started this. We've already moved it along a bit. We're not alone either in this endeavor, because it is not the kind of thing that you do every day or that all of us know how to do. It is a lot of complexity and very specialized knowledge is required. So we're part of a wider mutual banking network that's emerging over in Britain. And there are several other regions that have already started campaigns for their mutual bank. When Mary mentioned Preston, they've got one along with other councils in their area, Greater Manchester and around that area. So they have already launched their campaign. There's also one in Wales. There's one in Avon, that kind of west of England region. And there are campaigns in the northeast of England and the southwest of England. So we're part of that network, and we mutually support each other, and that allows us a lot of comfort. We're all pretty much using the same model, the same approach, and we can learn from each other. And because some of them are further down the road than we are, we're going to learn a lot more from them probably than they'll learn from us. But that'll be that we can work that to our advantage. We still have a lot of work to do in the campaign. Applying for the Bank of England license is one of the big pieces of work that has to be done yet. We also have to fundraise. The whole tab for this, to set it up and get it, get branches open and everything, is 20 million, which you might think is a lot of money, and it is to me or you, but in kind of governmental terms, it's not really a lot. If you look at what was spent by the Department of Communities during the pandemic in this last year alone, 304 million was spent. That's money that was had to be spent on various programs, but that's money that's gone. It has no legacy, whereas 20 million is a small amount of money compared to that. And this, it would set up a bank that would have a very long legacy and very far reach. So that's the kind of money that we need. We also need to build a team of people around us and get some executive people that we can employ that would actually take us through the licensing process. And we need to do some more market research and of course reach out to the public to start building the customer base. And you know, anybody here tonight who's interested in joining the campaign, we're more than welcome to have people on board. So that's really me.
Super. That sounds like you're at a well advanced stage. Just a quick reminder, people, I can see there's already a couple of questions popping up in the chat function. You can submit questions. In the meantime, in fact, there's one on mutual banks. So I'm saying that's why I'm saying that now. But we'll come back to that in a moment. So Lee, we've just been hearing about cooperative approach to money, but the economy is about more than just money. Do you want to tell us about the repair cafes?
Yeah, thanks very much. And thanks to Bridget and Tiziana and Mary. So I suppose I'm kind of going to talk a bit tonight. I'm particularly interested in community aspect of community wealth building, and that the dominant economic model has had pretty negative impact on communities. Hyper-consumerism, individualism, our communities have been kind of quite atomized and fragmented over the last 40 years. So the work that we're doing in the Repair Cafe and in Positive Carrickfergus is trying to rebuild community in a number of different ways. In the Repair Cafe, where Mary mentioned about community wealth building as an approach where we try to live within planetary means, and the Repair Cafe grew out of a concern around what we're doing to the planet, the climate emergency and the waste crisis that's being created by hyper-consumerism. And there are more than 2,000 repair cafes right across the world. Our repair cafe started in Belfast in December 2017, and we've had since then about 18 physical repair cafes, and we're doing some stuff online at the minute. Every other Thursday night we have a Mend and Pile meetup, so have a look for that if you're interested in sewing your buttons on that have been sitting there for 2 years and you've been thinking about it. Come and join us. And so we're really interested in, I suppose, providing some solutions so people can consume less, and we can change our relationship to our stuff and use what we have for much longer. Climate emergency responses are often, I think, that are really visible, often talk about policy change at a government level. And certainly I've been to events where I have left feeling pretty disillusioned about the change that's possible and the time frame that is available to us. And at that particular event, I really wanted to jump up and say, go home and repair something. You can do that tonight. Come to a repair cafe and do it in community. And I suppose, that, so there's like policy or individual responses, and we are really interested in what happens whenever people come together as a community to create some solutions. We're not saying the repair cafe is the only solution, but repair is part of the solution to the way we're not living within planetary boundaries at the minute. And repair needs to be a real option in terms of what a new economy could look like. So if you look at the growth in recycling as a result of local government targets, and then the procurement processes, like think of the difference that could be made if repair became much higher up the agenda in local government and central government, and the difference that could make to our economy. So we're, longer term, what we want to do is get repair up the agenda, and through really wonderful experiences when we come together to use the skills that already exist in our communities. And longer term, we'd really love to see repair back on our high streets and repair jobs. And if you look at like Sophie Unwin in Glasgow through the Remade Network, she's already starting to make that happen. So and I know, and maybe John Barry's here tonight. We got a great phrase from him. I think it's from Naomi Klein, which is like moving from a dig and gig economy to a repair and care economy, and repair is really central to that. And then the other work that I'm interested in, or that I'm doing at the minute, is through a project in Carrick called Positive Carrickfergus. And in terms of community wealth building, that really connects in with the just land use issue. And when I started doing this work in Carrickfergus in October 2017, what became really clear very quickly was that the majority of people who live in Carrick are really concerned about the decline of the high street. And one of the our high street in Carrick, right at the end, has got a town hall in it that is chronically underused. It is owned by the council. It is a really beautiful space with a lovely, a big room with a stage that could, currently could be holding arts and culture events, all sorts of, and then lots of meeting rooms that could be used for all sorts of arts classes. We could have a tool library, we could have repair events. There's so much that could be happening in that space if it was either owned by the community or there was a partnership between the community and the local council. That would also bring people into our town centre and re-energise the high street. That kind of using what we have differently and better, and rebuilding our social infrastructure, I think, is really crucial element of rebuilding our communities. And I'm also interested in, so we have a lot of privately owned buildings in our town centre that are owned by people who don't even live in Northern Ireland. And they're really not concerned about the impact of empty and derelict buildings in our town centre and what that does to us. And when we're feel like really powerless to create any change there whatsoever. So I'm really interested in other communities who have pooled their wealth to buy buildings together. And that's played a really crucial role in the regeneration of high streets in other towns right across the UK. So there's great examples. And even so Randallstown, they own commercial and domestic properties. And there's a Randallstown Arches Association. So there's places already doing it, and I suppose that's what one of the messages that we want to get across tonight as well. So often when in the past when we have come to events like this, the focus has been on projects and ideas from outside Northern Ireland, and we're really keen to say that actually this stuff is already happening here, and we've been working together to connect it up, and it's really important that we make it visible. And then how do we nurture what's already happening here to build an economy that works for everybody?
Thank you very much. It sounds to me as though we were talking about community wealth building. It's not just about the wealth building, but I can see there's a couple of questions in the chat box here. I'll come back to one of those in a minute, but maybe
Repeat what you said.
Sorry, yes, I just was going to turn to you to ask, we were listening a minute ago about the top down versus bottom up, the grassroots level and the top down level in terms of, government and political structures. But what about the, in the economic sphere in terms of cooperative businesses themselves? You think of them as being sort of small scale, local grassroots organizations. Are they able to compete at the big level? And if they get to the big level, to be able to compete with some of the big chains, do they lose some of their democratic character, or what way do you think that works?
Well, first of all, we have to demystify the concept of growth. What do we mean by growth? Is growth something that we are always obtaining by scaling up this enterprise? Or growth can be something that we will obtain by connecting small, local, community or workers-owned enterprises that stimulates economy demand, but also answer economy local needs. So it's a kind of looking at the economy from with a different pair of glasses, put in this way, where we re-examine really the concept that we always thought were true to a particular type of economic thoughts. And it's not that the case. In Italy, if you are exploring some of the region like Emilia-Romagna, you will see that the economic development has happened with that connection, networking of small producers or small cooperatives across the region. And that was a better way to scaling up the impact of those cooperatives. So I will say that that was not the tradition, for instance, of the agricultural cooperatives in Ireland, that unfortunately they decided that scaling up their enterprise meant to concentrate assets and wealth in the hands of the many, of the few instead of the many. And therefore they became more and more corporate organizations. So it's about us to really make a political and consensus choice about what we want to grow, how do we want to grow it, and how do we want to live economically in our region, and not leave those decisions to others, and certainly not leave it to public policy that in this moment, until now, has been really favoring investment from outside, a big company coming here, instead of building from the grassroots on. So
it's rather than scaling vertically up, it's almost like economy of spreading horizontally out.
It's the word that you use, Maurice, ecosystems. The economy is an ecosystem of players. It can be the financial player, it can be the energy player, it can be the town hall in the village. It's the ecosystem. So can we start to think in those terms, and then we transform our way to approach economic problems.
Can I wonder, just come in a wee bit on our experience in Repair Cafe. Just because what Tiziana was saying was kind of reminded me about our approach. So we started off operating in Belfast, and people would get in touch with us and say, will you come to do a Repair Cafe in Castlewellan? Will you come and do one in Antrim? And we would say no, which was a bit weird because community organisations don't usually say no. And we were very clear about we operate in Belfast. And practically speaking, it doesn't really work to ask our volunteers to travel somewhere else to run repair cafes. It also doesn't work in terms of our ethos, because we're really keen to make visible the repair skills that have been privatised somewhat, that are at kitchen tables and in garden sheds, and we want to make them visible in the places where they are. And then also, like, if we did it, we'd go, all right, well, we're here, we fixed some stuff, we'll see you again in 2 years, because we're away traveling to other places to go and save them. So that's, that kind of expectation that you'll scale up in some way and continue to eat into other communities and go out and save them and go, da-da, we're here to fix your stuff. But what we do instead is we say, if there's 3 or 4 people in your place that are interested in setting up a repair cafe, we'll come and work with you to help set up a repair cafe where you are, where you have the connections, where you know that they're actually repair businesses that you can refer people on to for repairs that are too complex to be dealt with at a repair cafe. We couldn't possibly do that. So that's, so it's a similar idea. And the way we describe it is that we take a cutting from our repair cafe in Belfast and we plant it in another place, and it takes root there according to the conditions in that place, with the people who live there and know that place well. And we were doing that work before the pandemic. We helped create Antrim and Newtownabbey got a repair cafe up and running. South Down had their first repair cafe a month before we went into lockdown, and the Stay Market of Portadown were just about to have their first repair cafe when we went. So it's a similar idea. How do you share that learning and help other people to to create something that makes sense for those places. And I think with community wealth building, it's really important to note that it's not a model, it's an approach. Because what we often do with models, we tend to lift them off the shelf and try and just make them work in a particular place. And the community wealth building approach acknowledges that the context and the conditions in places are really important. And you work with the conditions and the context in that place, so that the approach is flexible enough to really maximize what the possibilities are in the place where it's being introduced.
There seems to be a lot of comments and questions coming in to the chat box here. Someone says, nice to think of the similar linguistic roots to ecosystem and economy. Eco equals household or home from the Greek. There's a question in, actually it's jumping about a bit, so I've just, someone has asked, Mary, I'll maybe come to you with this one, because it's about what are the realistic prospects of getting, say, the Department for Communities or whatever to thoroughly adopt a community wealth building approach. Is it realistic? I know you wrote recently about how Belfast City Council had missed an opportunity. Maybe you want to take it up from there. Oh, you're muted. That's what I did at the beginning.
Yeah. The thing is that what I discovered when I discovered Preston in 2018 and what they were doing was that Belfast had been looking at the approach as well. So I did some research last year to discover why wasn't there a Belfast model? Why did we have a Preston model and not a Belfast model? And I discovered that it was like this, this being wedded to a neoliberal approach, thinking there's only one way to do economic development, and that's by taking in foreign direct investment rather than community wealth building. I also discovered that there's a lot of silo work in here, which is a huge barrier to progress, and it's a huge barrier to progress in other places as well. And also a lack of urgency. And I see John asked us John Barry asked in the questions about one thing we could change, and that's really hard to just go on one thing. But I discovered in other places where they've implemented this that there's a real urgency to resolve poverty, and I didn't find that urgency here. I'm really heartened by Deirdre Harkey, statements on community wealth building. But yeah, we've yet to see anything. And in other places like North Ayrshire launched their community wealth building strategy in May during the first lockdown. And they've proceeded, they have a very, very ambitious strategy. It's like they've learned from Preston, they're going further. And so I think progress here has been hampered by by COVID, but it doesn't have to be. That if we're really serious about doing this, and how can we change this vision? I suppose it's like for people to realize the economy is a system, that it can be changed, and to take risks. Like the desire is there. It would be good if the other departments at Stormont were into that as well. But the Department for Finance the expert report for the anti-poverty strategy, there's talk about the Assembly being a living wage employer, which is another step in the right direction. So it's actually do something, I mean, that's what I found with Belfast City Council. They talked about it, and they talk about social clauses, and they're still talking about it, but they're not actually taking the action. But actually, Queen's are looking at this now. So maybe it's an anchor, if Queen's adopt community wealth building as part of their UN Sustainable Development Goals, this is all going to push. It's all going to be pressure on the council to move. And the fact that there's 53 people here tonight shows the interest that there is in this, and COVID's a great opportunity to do something different. And we can't go back to normal, because normal was us sending people to food banks, having to find, having to feed children during school holidays, help families with that, help working families with getting uniforms for their kids. I don't want to go back to that.
No. I think there was a phrase you used in that article I talked about, which, by the way, for everyone listening, is on the Queen's University Policy Engagement website, QPOL. If you Google QPOL, you'll see the phrase you used is that this is an idea whose time has come. And I guess it does seem to be more and more talked about and more discussed, not least by Professor Barry, who's we've mentioned a couple of times tonight. I was going to save his question for the end, and I can see we've only got 5 minutes left here. So I don't think we're going to get to all the questions that are in the chat box tonight, but we're going to be able to maybe try to record that and address them in the podcast that's coming up. So maybe as we sort of come towards a conclusion, we'll take John up on that, and I'll ask the other three who have not yet chipped in here, if there was just one thing you could choose, one policy, one practice that you would like to see adopted, what would it be? Tiziana, maybe you start.
Okay, well, the obvious one from our own perspective, cooperative alternatives perspective, is to have more attention given to cooperative development, because it still happens outside the government. Very few agencies supported by government to do cooperative development. This is why cooperative alternative was born, because nobody was pay attention to cooperative development. But in addition to that, I would like to see in a bigger vision way, a convergence, maybe a more convergence between the civil service and the political representation. When we went to visit Preston, what was evident, what really kept the mechanism going and the ideas flowing, was that there was a great union of minds between the civil servants in the local authority and the political representative in the council. And that marriage of intentions made the difference. I fear that in Northern Ireland, we still see divergence all the time, where either one or the others are the conservative, the risk averse, instead of looking at the bigger picture like they did in Preston. So for sure, it's not a model to be copied, but a model to be inspired by. And because we are made by common citizens, civil servants are common citizens as well as the politicians. We need them to really think, what kind of country do we want to live in? And if that is the vision, can we work together? And I think this is the bigger challenges that I've seen in the last 10 years for our public sector.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Bridget and Lee to just in a word, Bridget, what was your pick?
In a word, oh my God. Well, John talked about the really big things that you'd love to see changed. I mean, I would love to see capitalism completely removed from the scene. That's what I'd really like. Everything we've been talking about here, they're really good measures. They are alternatives, but they're interim. And until we remove capitalism, that is a huge problem that has caused really our environmental crisis. And we are not going to get out of that crisis if we continue to depend on capitalism to do that. So removing the continuous growth, the neoliberal model, is that big enough?
That's pretty big. That's pretty ambitious.
I'll leave it there.
Lee, what's your pick?
So I'm going to reject the premise of the question and say that actually we've been talking about ecosystems.
Yeah.
And if you're thinking about systems thinking, then actually what we need is lots of solutions, not one big one. Nice.
I like it. And that is a very good note on which to draw this fascinating discussion to an end. I've just got to thank the organizers. I've got to thank the wonderful Imagine Festival. You've heard a bit about John Barry. He's on tomorrow as well, so check that out. I'll be back at the end of the week with a panel on race relations. There's plenty of other really great events. I hope you tune in and enjoy them. Thanks, of course, to the Alternative Economists, Mary McManus, Tiziana O'Hara, Bridget Main and Lee Robb. And thanks to everybody else who turned up, and I hope you enjoyed the evening. Thank you and good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.